The Ukraine war has followed the same pattern for over 2 years. Ever since Russian President Vladimir Putin began his special military operation, the war has been a constant series of attacks on Ukrainian territory. Each one of those attacks has been met the same way. A valiant Ukrainian defense attempts to repel the Russian invaders. The defense works most of the time. However, we can't ignore the fact that Russia has taken key territory in Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass, where it controls the majority of the major city of Donetsk. All told, Russia is believed to control around 18% of Ukraine, and it claims to have taken 211 square miles in 2024 alone. But the tide of the war is turning. For the first time since February 2022, Ukraine has gone on the offensive and taken on Russia at its own game. Ukraine now holds territory in Kursk, which is a Russian oblast. Ukraine is now attacking Russia on Russian soil. Here we provide a day-by-day analysis of the Ukrainian invasion of Russia. August 6, 2024. A major turning point in the Ukraine war was coming, only it wasn't the turning point that everybody expected. August 6 saw Ukraine begin flying operations with F-16 fighter jets for the first time. Those jets had been a long time coming, but they would finally provide Ukraine with options, both in attacking Russia behind the war's front lines and establishing some patches of aerial dominance. The emergence of those jets was the big news of the day. But bubbling under the surface was something much more important. Reports started surfacing that a small contingent of Ukrainian troops had breached Russia's border defenses and attempted to make their way into Kursk. We say attempted because the early reports came from Russia. Acting Kursk governor Alexei Smirnov said that about 300 Ukrainian troops, backed by a convoy of 11 tanks and more than 20 armored vehicles, had approached the Russian border. They were repelled, according to Smirnov, who said, fighters from the FSB border guards and the Russian armed forces prevented the border from being breached. More details emerged from the MASH Telegram channel. It claimed that the attempted invasion had resulted in the deaths of 20 saboteurs, along with injury for a further 50. Ukraine also shelled the small town of Sudza, damaging residential buildings and killing 5 people, in addition to sending a fleet of drones, 26 of which were supposedly shot down. It appeared that Russia had repelled a small-scale invasion attempt. But like so much of the information to come out of Russia, the initial reports about the Kursk invasion were incorrect. The Ukrainian army had entered Russian territory and, far from being repelled, it was actively advancing. August 7, 2024. Russia kept up the pretense of having successfully repelled the Ukrainian invaders. Smirnov claimed the situation in the region he oversaw was controllable, even though Ukraine had maintained a campaign of aerial attacks on Kursk with shelling and fleets of drones. Ukraine was oddly silent, leading many to wonder if the attempted invasion had happened at all, and if it had, whether it was one approved by Kyiv. The days to come would soon see that approval was granted and Ukraine had been successful. But for now, confusion reigned. Moscow still claimed to have repelled the invasion, with Putin going on record to call the attempt a major provocation. This is typical of the Russian leader. He ignored the constant flood of soldiers and equipment he sent to Ukraine to unleash an empty threat about how Ukraine giving him a dose of his own medicine would end badly. Ivor Bennett, a Sky News Moscow correspondent, speculated that Russia had been forced to move troops and send reservists to thwart the Ukrainian invasion. That may have been the goal all along. With Russia focusing on capturing more territory in Donetsk, he posited, Kyiv may have decided to launch a false invasion to divert troops and give itself some breathing room. It would soon become clear that there was nothing false about what was happening in Kursk. August 8, 2024. Still, no official comment on the Kursk invasion from Kyiv, but a comment wasn't needed. It was rapidly becoming apparent to the Western media that Russia's claims of repelling the Ukrainian invasion were false. Not only had it failed to stop Ukraine, but its enemy was quickly gaining ground and taking territory within Russia. Smirnov had offered the first signs that all was not as Russia claimed. Toward the end of August 7th, he declared a state of emergency in Kursk, a clear sign that Ukrainian troops were in the territory and making gains. August 8th saw clashes intensify, with Ukraine typically coming out on top. Interestingly, the first signs of approval of the invasion also came. Speaking to reporters, European Commissioner spokesperson Peter Stano said, Ukraine is fighting a rightful defensive war based on international law. Ukraine has a right to defend itself, and this right to defend itself includes hitting the enemy on its own territory. This is exactly what Ukraine was doing. In addition to evacuating 6,000 people from the northeastern region of Sumy, which sits on the border between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine was going on the offensive. Reports emerged that it had taken the Sudza gas hub, which lies about 4.9 miles behind the border and is key to Gazprom's European gas network. Almost all of the natural gas the Russian state-owned energy company sells to Europe flows through that hub. Ukraine now held it, along with almost 24 small villages and settlements. Reports also started coming in that Ukraine was deeper than expected in Russian territory. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, claimed Ukrainian soldiers had been spotted up to 6.2 miles deep into Kursk. Other sources, such as Politico, claimed the incursion was even deeper. Ukrainian soldiers had been spotted in the village of Bolshosoldatsky, which lies almost 25 miles into Russian territory. It was finally clear Ukraine hadn't just attempted to invade Russia. It had succeeded and was now advancing while maintaining hold of several territories. And although Kyiv still hadn't made an official comment, it was clear the invasion was approved. Oleksiy Goncharenko gave the first indication, saying on Telegram, "Kursk region, day 3, everything is according to plan." August 9, 2024. More details began to emerge about Ukraine's invasion. Up to 1,000 Ukrainians had entered Kursk, far more than the 300 Russia claimed to have repelled, and they were backed by dozens of armored vehicles. Far from having fought back against the invasion, it was clear that Russia had been taken completely by surprise. The full picture remained murky, but it was clear at least that Ukraine was advancing far deeper than official messaging from the Kremlin would suggest. Ukraine was also starting to expand its incursions. Crimea had been an obvious target for Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Annexed by Russia in 2014, the territory was formally under Ukrainian control, and it's clear Ukraine wants it back. August 9th saw Ukraine unleash a drone attack on the port city of Sevastopol, which is home to many of the ships in Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Russia claimed to have destroyed 3 drone boats and 3 aerial drones in the assault. Drones were also being used to attack other Russian territories, including Lipetsk and Belgorod. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed to have shot down 75 drones over those territories. Whether that was true has never been established, though the drone assault showed that Ukraine was looking to take more than a handful of settlements in Kursk. Multiple detonations along with a severe fire were also seen at Russia's Lipetsk airport. Ukraine later took credit for the massive drone attack that caused them. More information about Ukrainian tactics in Russia also started to emerge. The ISW noted that armored Ukrainian groups were advancing via the Russian rear, bypassing poorly guarded fortifications in the process before engaging the Russian soldiers on their own terms. These small groups weren't consolidating the territory they captured, rather they would attack and move on, forcing Russia to continuously divert troops to try and deal with the confusion. Those small groups would be followed by much larger ones which could then consolidate the attacked territory. It was now obvious that Ukraine's incursion into Kursk wasn't just a temporary raid. It was a full-blown invasion, one that had seen it capture at least a dozen settlements and likely more as part of a concerted campaign. August 10, 2024. Russia continued to claim it was repelling the Ukrainian attacks even as the evidence mounted that it was losing territory. Finally, August 8th brought word from the White House, with Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh being asked if the Pentagon was concerned that Russia would escalate now Ukraine was in its territory. Her answer? No, because at the end of the day, Ukraine is fighting for its sovereign territory that its neighbor invaded. It was yet another approval for Ukraine's approach, though one that came with the caveat of Washington claiming to have had no advanced knowledge of the attack. By August 10th, Russia started sending extra forces into Kursk, with reports emerging that some of the soldiers were transporting Grad multiple rocket launch systems, alongside tanks and artillery, into the region. News also emerged that Russia had evacuated over 76,000 people from the Kursk region, with Russia also claiming that it had used a thermobaric bomb on the invading Ukrainian forces. Reuters also reported that Ukraine had sent several thousands more troops into Kursk, with some being embedded as deep as 12 miles into Russian territory. Belarus was also drawn into the invasion, albeit in a small way. Its president and Putin supporter Alexander Lukashenko claimed his country's air defenses had shot down several unspecified objects launched from Ukraine that flew over Belarus. "I do not understand why Ukraine needs this," Lukashenko claimed. "We need to figure it out. As I said before, we made it clear to them that any provocations will not go unanswered." This is from a man who allowed his country to be used as a launching pad for Putin's special military operation. August 11, 2024. Official confirmation of the Kursk invasion finally came from Kyiv. While addressing the nation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "Today I received several reports from Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky regarding the front lines and our actions to push the war onto the aggressor's territory. Ukraine is proving that it can indeed restore justice and ensure the necessary pressure on the aggressor." The comments came on the same day that Russia's defense ministry claimed to have destroyed 14 Ukrainian drones along with 4 Tochka-U ballistic missiles over the Kursk region. Russia failed to destroy everything Ukraine sent, however, with the ministry claiming that the drones and missiles that got through injured 13 people, with one missile destroying a 9-story residential building. Note Russia's claims that the attackers are targeting residential buildings. It's clear from this point that Putin was attempting to paint Ukraine as a country that goes after civilian targets. In Belarus, Lukashenko was making good on his promise to respond to Ukrainian drones flying over his territory. He sent troops to reinforce the border Belarus shares with Ukraine, though no fighting occurred. Reports also started emerging that the Kremlin was trying to downplay the Ukrainian invasion. Verstka, a Russian opposition outlet, claimed that Putin had recommended that his deputies and senators say nothing about what was happening until further notice. Elsewhere, Ukraine was advancing into other Russian territories. Newsweek reported that Ukraine's forces had pushed into Belgorod, another Russian oblast that sits further north than Kursk. Footage published on Telegram appeared to show Ukraine's soldiers in the village of Poroz, which is about a mile inside Russia and 60 miles away from the Sudza gas station in Kursk. The video was accompanied by a message. With best wishes, the 252nd Battalion is in the Poroz settlement in the Belgorod region. Kursk was no longer the only Russian territory on the Ukrainian agenda. Subsequent reports would reveal that Ukraine engaged in a shelling campaign against Poroz, resulting in 4 people being injured. Professor Clark, a Sky News security and defense analyst, claimed that Ukraine's Kursk invasion had seen it go 15 miles deep into Russian territory while establishing a new front line that was at least 35 miles long. He also notes that Ukraine has sent the equivalent of around 3 or 4 brigades into Kursk, with all containing top-level elite troops. More images of Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk also started appearing, including a photograph of a tank firing before it gets engulfed in a massive smoke plume, showcasing just how intense the fighting had become. And of course, Putin continued his hypocritical comments about Ukraine's actions. Russia's defense ministry labeled the Kursk invasion barbaric, while claiming that it made no military sense, at least none that Russia could see. The day wrapped up with a report from the Kursk offices of the Red Cross. It had received nearly 3,000 calls in less than 24 hours from worried Russian citizens. August 12, 2024. By this point, Putin could no longer shy away from the humiliating blow dealt to him and his presidency by the Kursk invasion. His declaration that Russia would launch a counter-terrorism operation against the Ukrainian invaders stopped short of a declaration of war within Russia. But it was an official acknowledgement. Ukraine was doing more damage than Putin and his cronies had initially claimed. Away from Kursk, mass evacuations began in Belgorod, with the region's leader, Vyacheslav Gladkov, announcing on Telegram that the enemy is active on the border of the Krasnoyarski district. The Poroz settlement capture was no smokescreen or false invasion. It had actually happened, and Belgorod now faced a similar fate to Kursk. Further justification for the Kursk invasion also came from Zelensky, who pointed out that Ukraine's Sumy region had absorbed around 2,000 strikes emanating from Kursk in the summer of 2024 alone. The invasion was dubbed a fair response, and one that would potentially allow Ukraine to establish new and stretched front lines in advance of winter. Russia's defense ministry also made more claims of shooting down drones. Overnight, it said it destroyed 5 drones over Belgorod and a further 11 over Kursk, though it didn't say whether any of those drones reached their targets. That omission likely means that they did. As August 12th progressed, more details about the Belgorod evacuation emerged. Residents were told that they faced a missile threat from Ukraine, leading to around 11,000 people leaving their homes in the Krasnoyarski district. Around 500 remained by midday, according to Sky News, showcasing just how much of an effect Ukraine's invasion has had. The day was rounded out by Kursk acting governor Smirnov telling Putin that Ukraine now controlled 28 settlements in the oblast via video conference. At the same time, Ukraine was claiming to now control around 386 square miles of territory in Kursk. China also chimed in, calling on all parties to avoid further escalation while claiming that Beijing would continue to play a constructive role in facilitating a political settlement of the crisis. August 13, 2024. The day began with reports that Ukrainian soldiers were taking down Russian flags in settlements across Kursk. Elsewhere, the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, revealed that Putin had received advance warning that Ukraine intended to invade Kursk, but had essentially chosen to do nothing with the information. RUSI Senior Associate Fellow Mark Galliotti said that Putin thought it was going to be a short and minor raid. Instead, he'd been caught with his pants down as Ukraine swept through a poorly defended Russian oblast. More drone attacks had been launched overnight, according to Russia's defense ministry, which claimed that it had destroyed 12 over the Kursk, Belgorod, and Voronezh regions. A third region was now in play, though Russia chose to omit any information regarding the potential success of those drones. It did respond in kind, though, sending 38 drones and a pair of Iskander-M ballistic missiles into Ukraine in a counterstrike during the early hours of the morning. News also started emerging that Kursk evacuees were being provided with temporary lodgings, with some as far away as Azov, which is a small town nearly 500 miles away from Kursk. Russia also continued to threaten further escalation while providing zero specifics when its foreign intelligence service claimed that Zelensky is taking crazy steps that threaten to escalate far beyond Ukraine. Or in other words, Russia really doesn't like fighting the war it started within its own borders. Meanwhile, Zelensky had welcomed US Senators Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham to Kyiv, with the latter quipping that Zelensky should "remind me not to invade Ukraine," while calling the Kursk invasion a bold and brilliant move. By this point, Ukraine was also focusing on defending what it had gained, restricting civilian movement in the previously mentioned Sumy region to guard against Russian counterattacks. More people were also evacuated from Kursk, bringing the number fleeing that region up to over 100,000, and Ukraine began claiming that it controlled far more settlements than Smirnov stated in his call with Putin. Ukrainian Chief of Staff Oleksandr Syrsky told Zelensky during a video call that Ukraine actually held 74 settlements. Inspections and stabilization measures are carried out there, claimed Zelensky's chief, who also added that Ukraine had taken 15.4 square miles of Russian territory over the previous 24 hours. The day ended with reports that Russia was starting to move troops from Kaliningrad to Kursk to deal with the invasion. For context, Kaliningrad is a Russian oblast that's separated from the country's mainland, instead being surrounded by Poland and the Baltic states. Removing soldiers from that oblast was a desperate move. It meant a key piece of Russian territory was no longer as well defended as it was previously. August 14, 2024, a new state of emergency was declared. This time it was in Belgorod, which had been the subject of a secondary invasion that was successful enough for the region's head, Vyacheslav Gladkov, to take to Telegram and appeal to Putin to declare a federal state of emergency. That request was granted amidst Putin condemning Ukraine's Western allies for remaining silent over Ukraine's actions. They hadn't, most had approved even if they weren't directly involved. US President Joe Biden called the Kursk incursion a real dilemma for Putin, showing that the West was far from being silent. More support came from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who simply said Ukraine's actions are defensive during an interview with Polski radio. Russia also claimed that peace talks would now be on hold due to the invasion, as though they were progressing in the first place. The Wall Street Journal also revealed that Moscow was continuing to pull troops from elsewhere to fight the Ukrainians in Kursk, including from Ukraine itself. If Ukraine's goal was to divert Moscow's attention from its activities in places like Donetsk and Kherson, it was clearly working. Meanwhile, Ukraine's troops were continuing their invasion. The country's general staff claimed that an overnight combat mission in Kursk had resulted in the destruction of a $30 million Su-34 fighter. Ukraine also announced that it had captured 100 Russian soldiers in Kursk during the previous day's fighting, adding to a total of nearly 1,000 captures since the invasion began. 4 Russian airfields were also reportedly targeted via drone attacks, though Sky News said it was unable to verify the claims. If true, they demonstrate that Ukraine was taking a methodical approach to the invasion that included destroying any chance Russia would have of securing aerial dominance. These sites were later identified as Savoslayka, Kalino, Baltimore, and Borisoglebsk. More backing for Ukraine's actions came throughout the day as the West continued to prove Putin's claims of silence wrong. Petteri Orpo, the Finnish Prime Minister, said that Ukraine had a right to self-defense that included the Kursk invasion, with those comments being backed by Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal. Reports also emerged that many of the soldiers Putin was sending to defend Kursk were inexperienced conscripts. That's another humiliation for Putin. He had previously claimed that new conscripts would not be expected to immediately serve on the front lines. Ukraine rounded out the day with the announcement that it would start creating security corridors for Kursk civilians, giving them the option to evacuate into Ukraine or escape the region by going deeper into Russia. August 15, 2024. Another day, another round of evacuations from Kursk. Reuters reported that the number had now reached 200,000, leading credence to the claims that Ukraine was moving ever deeper into the oblast. Satellite images also emerged of a series of anti-vehicle ditches and trenches being built in Lugov, which is around 10.5 miles north of the furthest Ukrainian advances into Kursk as of August 15th, according to the ISW. Russia was preparing for a fight deeper into its own territory. Elsewhere, a series of Sky News interviews with Russian prisoners of war captured in Kursk revealed the reality of the invasion from the Russian perspective. Many of those fighting against the elite Ukrainian soldiers were aged between 19 and 21, again showing Putin's willingness to throw inexperienced conscripts at Ukraine. Ukrainian officials also revealed that their convoy vehicles weren't large enough to transport all of the prisoners they were taking, necessitating several trips. Yet another humiliation for Putin. News also emerged that Ukraine had likely used British-made Challenger 2 tanks as part of the invasion. The UK Ministry of Defence declined to comment, though the UK had already made it clear that Ukraine could use the weapons it provides in any way it sees fit. Ukraine also claimed to have advanced another mile into Kursk territory in the previous 24 hours, in addition to setting up a military office to serve as a base for the invasion. Ukraine was bedding as Russia dawdled in its efforts to repel the country's forces. Finally, the capture of the Russian town of Sudza, home of the previously mentioned gas depot, was made official. A Ukrainian news channel released a video showing the country's troops unfurling the country's flags on one of the town's administrative buildings. Sudza is just 65 miles southwest of the city of Kursk. Russia wasn't sitting back though, at least according to the information it was putting out. The evening saw Russia claim it was using air-to-surface missiles against the invading Ukrainians, adding that all targets were neutralized. August 16, 2024. The world is on the brink of a third world war. Those were the words of Russian parliamentary deputy Mikhail Sheremet on August 16th, again demonstrating Russia's pattern of attempting to use threats and intimidation to quell the Kursk invasion. It didn't work. Russia's response to the invasion was derided as being ineffective and complicated by the ISW, while a Putin aide claimed that both the West and NATO had helped Ukraine plan the invasion. That isn't confirmed. Signs of pessimism began to emerge in Russia, with Karen Shakhnazarov warning, on Russian state television no less, that the country could lose if such blunders continue. If nothing else, Ukraine had severely demoralized Russia with a reality check of what the Ukraine war could really be with its invasion. Then came the big news of the day. Ukraine destroyed a bridge over the River Seine in Kursk, creating a logistical nightmare for Russia. Not only was that bridge no longer available to the country's troops, but it also couldn't be used for evacuations anymore. Footage of the strike was later published on Telegram to confirm that it had happened. August 17, 2024. 5 more Russian villages in Belgorod were evacuated overnight, continuing that region's descent into a state of emergency. The Russian Foreign Ministry was also quick to claim that Ukraine had used Western-made rocket launchers to destroy the same river bridge, though this wasn't independently verified. Speaking in a video to address his nation, President Zelensky discussed how the Kursk invasion was designed to cause maximum damage to all Russian positions, as he confirmed that strikes on key logistical sites such as the same river bridge and the previously mentioned airfields were part of that approach. Beyond that, little else happened on this day, which appeared to be more about consolidating positions than causing active damage in Kursk. August 18, 2024. Reports of a fire at an oil depot in Rostov emerged during the morning. Russia claims that it was caused by the debris from drones it shot down, with Governor Vasily Golubov stating that firefighters had been sent to the location to get the blaze under control. They would fail, with the blaze only growing in size in the coming days. A second Russian bridge over the same river, this one located in Zvanoye, also came under Ukrainian fire, with an enormous hole being blown into it by Ukraine's air force. Meanwhile, President Lukashenko increased his reinforcement of the Belarusian border, sending 120,000 troops to guard against a possible Ukrainian incursion. At least that's what some reports claimed. Ukraine later dismissed the reports as false, stating that Lukashenko was simply trying to appease Putin by crafting an illusion of power. Back in Kursk, another 3,000 civilians were evacuated, with Zelensky claiming that Ukraine was still inflicting losses on Russia in the territory. August 19, 2024. Confirmation came that the bridge in Zvanoye had been destroyed, marking another blow for Ukraine against Kursk's logistical systems. By this point, the shock and awe of the invasion had worn off, giving way to an improved, methodical approach in which Ukraine more carefully picked its targets. The late morning of August 19th brought with it reports that Ukraine had targeted a third bridge over the same river. A clear pattern emerged. Ukraine was cutting off access to the territory it had taken. Beyond that, the news contained little more than confirmation of the evacuation of some 121,000 people from Kursk, along with more claims from Putin that peace talks would be impossible as long as Ukraine remained in Kursk. August 20, 2024. This day was marked by more Russian strikes in Ukraine than attacks in Kursk. An overnight attack in the Sumy region left 18,500 Ukrainians without electricity, with Russia also launching what would prove to be its 5th missile strike on Kyiv in August. The fire at the Rostov oil depot continued to rage, engulfing 20 of the reservoir's 74 tanks and injuring 41 people. By August 20th, Russia had sent around 500 firefighters to the blaze and still didn't have it under control. As for the Kursk invasion, it had slowed, but Ukraine was making marginal advances, according to the ISW. By the end of the day, the country claimed to hold around 480 square miles of Russian territory, which included 92 settlements in Kursk alone, and that it had advanced up to 21 miles into the Kursk Oblast. August 21st, 2024. Perhaps August 20th was the calm before the storm. On August 21st, Russia's defense ministry claimed that Moscow had come under attack by Ukrainian drones. Of course, it also claimed to have shot them all down, saying 11 were destroyed over Moscow, with a further 34 taken out of the skies over Kursk, Kaluga, Belgorod, and Bryansk. If true, it's clear that Ukraine is slowly extending the scope of its invasion to include other major Russian territories. News also came that Ukraine destroyed an S-300 anti-aircraft system in Rostov overnight. The UK's Ministry of Defence, or MOD, also analysed Russia's response to the Kursk invasion, claiming that said response created a bad look for Putin. Diverting personnel from previously high-priority areas likely demonstrates continuing personnel shortages, the MOD claimed, while pointing out that Putin had started misusing specialist motor rifle regiments as infantry to cover the Russian shortfall in Kursk. Russia also started setting up pontoon bridges, which are temporary floating bridges, though these soon came under Ukrainian attack. By mid-afternoon, Russia had restricted airspace over the northwestern cities of Apatity and Murmansk, which is usually an indicator that it expects Ukrainian drone strikes in those locations. That concludes the day-by-day analysis of Ukraine's invasion of Russia so far. If one thing is clear, it's that Russia has failed to repel Ukraine's forces. One question remains: how long can Ukraine hold the territory it's taken? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.